Moving on now to the second half of our event, we're going to share some incidents surrounding unpermitted, unqualified, and unlicensed work. We'll address our role in the safety system, as well as what we're doing to level the playing field for our clients who are doing their part in keeping BC safe. So let's get started with our plenary session. Our moderator for this session is Kaylin Kretschmer, Director of Safety Behavior and Management Approaches. Welcome, Kaylin.
Thanks, Courtney, and good morning, everyone. I'm joining you today here from Kelowna, the traditional and unceded territories of the Sila Okanagan peoples who have resided here since time immemorial. I'd also like to give thanks for all the rain that we've had over the last week, which is nourishing these beautiful lands as we move into the warmer weather season. We hope that you had a great time joining us for the first portion of our Core Connections event today, and an amazing turnout. So thank you for joining us for that, and also for joining us for today's plenary session. I'm excited to be hosting it as we dive deeper into BC's grey economy, which Phil alluded to earlier in the presentation, and really see what it means to cut corners as we talk about some of the real risks to you and your businesses with some case examples. We'll be ending off by sharing what you can do to support safety in your communities. So let's get started. Maybe we'll start with a little bit of housekeeping first. So like the first part of today's session, it is really meant to be interactive. So we encourage you to continue to share those great questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We will have a portion after our panel presentation for open Q&A. So we encourage you to continue throughout the presentation to put those questions in. We welcome the hard questions, and we also want to ensure that this remains a safe and inclusive environment for dialogue. So we just ask that you be considerate in how you're framing your questions as you enter them into the chat today. Finally, and I think Courtney mentioned this at the top of the session, but this session is being recorded. So if you'd like to share it with someone that wasn't able to attend today's session, or you'd like to be able to reference it again, you will be able to see it posted on our website, and we'll also be emailing it to you after today's session. So with that, we've got a packed agenda for you lined up. And I think really we're hoping that you'll walk away with a deeper understanding of what the gray market is and what some of those legal, financial, reputational, and social impacts are to clients, their businesses, and our communities when cost cutting is prioritized over safety. So with that, let's meet our panel. Today, I'm joined by Darla Faulkner, who's our Provincial Safety Manager for Enforcement. And I'm also joined by Ryan Hazlitt, which is our Provincial Safety Manager for Incident Investigations. Both Darla and Ryan hold important statutory decision-making roles with delegated powers of a Provincial Safety Manager under the Safety Standards Act and associated regulations. In addition, they also lead their own investigation teams and functional areas. Welcome, Darla and Ryan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kaylin. Good morning, everyone.
So before we jump into the topic of the gray market, it's important for us to all first understand the complexities of the safety system in BC. And by this, I mean the set of rules, regulations, and standards that govern how technical systems and equipment are designed, installed, maintained, operated, and decommissioned throughout their lifespan. It also includes who is actually qualified and licensed to do that regulated work on those systems. The system relies on the participation of all those involved, from the home, building, or equipment owner to the contractor or certified individual. It even includes members of the public or end users who may be interacting with those systems, like ski lifts or escalators. This participation builds the integrity of our safety system, which is ultimately designed to support public safety and to prevent or mitigate the likelihood of hazards or serious incidents from occurring, including those that cause damage, injury, or death in some cases. And we will be talking a little bit about some of those case examples in this morning's session. In short, we all have a role to play, and it's important that we all know the duties and responsibilities that we need to be legally accountable for. So what is the gray market? The gray market incorporates both individuals and businesses that are partially complying in the safety system. So they're complying with some, but not all regulatory requirements for permitting, licensing, and certification. For example, a business that may pull most, but not all permits that are required, or maybe undervalues or lets them expire. A company who might hold a license with Technical Safety BC in one technology, but maybe not all of the licenses or certifications required for the type of regulated work that they're doing. And we see that happening pretty often in some of our energy technologies between gas, electrical, and boilers. It also includes those that are not participating at all, so completely unlicensed or unqualified, although we often refer to that particular subsegment as the underground economy, or on this graphic, you can see it represented as sub-basement number 2. Overall, non-compliance with these requirements erodes the integrity of the system. If Jane or Joe isn't complying, why should I? It can quickly become a systemic issue if we don't adhere to what may appear on the surface to be unimportant administrative requirements. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but first let's go to a polling question. So you should have that popping up on your screen momentarily, and the question reads, what regulated industry in BC do you think represents or contributes the most to the gray market? And we have a few different options here: construction, real estate and housing, retail, food and beverage, public and institutional, which refers to hospitals, schools, court buildings, fire halls, government services, etc., the natural resource sector, manufacturing, or perhaps another segment that's not listed here. And I'm told that I think you might need to scroll down a little bit to see all of the options. So we'll just wait another moment for everyone to participate. Okay. All right, so looking at the results, it looks like about 50% have selected the construction industry as the largest contributor to gray market activity in BC, followed by the real estate and housing market at about 30%. And then we also see some contributions from the food and beverage and retail industries. So thanks, everyone. Really interesting. Very difficult to answer this one conclusively, as it is inherently hard to measure that underground activity. But what I can say is that according to a Statistics Canada report released in 2023, residential construction is noted as the largest contributor overall in Canada to gray market activity at about 35%. This includes in BC, where the total estimated economic value exceeds almost $10 billion. This is then followed by real estate at 12.7%, retail at about 10.5%, and the food industry at about 7.3%. So actually pretty close to what we see here in our poll. Interestingly, gray market activity overall relative to total GDP appeared highest in PEI and British Columbia, which really underscores that this is a challenge in our very own backyard. All right, so now that we've covered Gray Market 101, let's get to the good stuff and bring out our panel today. Welcome back, Darlene Ryan. So you both have unique roles here at Technical Safety BC as provincial safety managers. Can you share a little bit about the differences between an incident investigation and an enforcement investigation? And Darla, we're going to start with you today.
Great. Thanks so much, Kaylin. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here today. An enforcement investigation, we conduct our investigations to determine a duty holder's level of compliance with legislative requirements. So are they compliant or are they not compliant? We also conduct them to determine or to verify alleged noncompliance if we've received a complaint or report. Our investigations are triggered through external notifications, through contractors contacting our office or members of the general public. And they're also triggered through our regular oversight activities that are conducted by Technical Safety BC staff, whether that's through an on-site assessment or inspection, or through a regulatory audit conducted by the enforcement team. Our investigation process includes multiple ways of gathering evidence or facts about the case. It includes interviews, document reviews, reviewing business systems and processes, and we also go through processes to verify the evidence that we've received. In cases where we've identified that there is non-compliance and there's a risk to public, or an inability or an unwillingness from the contractor or the duty holder to comply, we may take enforcement actions. These enforcement actions are proportionate to the circumstances, and they can include things like a discipline order, a compliance order, imposing a monetary penalty, and in very serious cases, it may result in the suspension or revocation of a contractor's license. Throughout these processes, the duty holders are provided opportunity to participate, to be heard, present their case, and if they disagree with the enforcement actions taken, they do have a right to appeal that decision through the Safety Standards Appeal Board as well.
Got it. Thanks, Darla. So basically, it sounds like enforcement investigations really look at how folks are or are not meeting their legal obligations, and then, when necessary, taking proportionate actions. Ryan, what about on the incident side?
Yeah, thanks, Kaylin. And at Technical Safety BC, we delineate these two roles fairly specifically. So my role is a little bit different because our focus is on what we can do to inform the public and industry of what went wrong in order to support changes to the safety system and to industry. So my role is really to understand the whole story from all the different perspectives, what barriers might have existed to creating that safe scenario, or maybe in what context unsafe decisions might have been made. So hopefully by sharing that understanding, we can improve safety and prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. Some of the things that we might do following an investigation could be recommendations through to industry. It could be something that we put forward to code committees or presentations to contractor associations. In some cases as well, we even have internal changes to our own practices as a regulator and how we show up in the safety system as well.
Thanks, Ryan. So it sounds like our incident investigations are really focused on trying to understand the root cause of what happened, and then looking at kind of a broad range of tools for supporting education and preventing these things from happening in the future. So Darla, we're going to dig in a little bit further. Can you share a little bit about what steps Technical Safety BC is taking to identify and investigate gray market activities? What are you finding?
Yes, for sure. We're taking a lot of steps to identify the gray market. Some of that's happening through our regular day-to-day activities. A safety officer conducting an assessment on site may identify unpermitted work, or the enforcement team, as they're conducting a regulatory audit, may also identify noncompliances with licensing, certification, or permitting requirements. In addition to our day-to-day, we're also taking proactive steps to identify and investigate those who are not participating in the safety system. By searching online advertising, obtaining meter installation reports from utility companies, and receiving public reports, we've identified suspected gray market activities and conducted over 1,200 investigations in 2024 alone. These efforts uncovered several critical issues, including unsafe work conducted by unlicensed individuals, primarily in the gas and the electrical technologies. Some of the key areas where we found individuals and companies cutting corners include contractors who are performing regulated work with an expired license, contractors who are managing or performing work outside of their licensed technology. So for example, they hold a gas contractor license but are performing electrical work. licensed contractors obtaining permits for unlicensed or unqualified individuals. And in terms of permitting requirements, we've seen individuals or companies failing to obtain permits before they begin the regulated work, permit holders working outside the scope of their permits, or continuing to work after their permit has expired. And lastly, one of the key areas that we have found is individuals or companies who are advertising regulated work without the required license. Most of these non-compliances were resolved after informing the duty holders of the regulatory requirements. However, when education alone was insufficient, appropriate enforcement measures were taken in those circumstances.
That's really interesting, Darla, and it sounds like from what you've just shared that there are some significant gaps in knowledge specifically around licensing and permitting management in particular, but it also sounds like a good chunk of those folks are maybe unintentionally in some cases operating outside the safety system. And once they're made aware, they are coming back into compliance without us having to take those enforcement or disciplinary measures, which is good to hear. Okay, so it seems like you're in the hot seat today. I'm going to keep you here for another minute. Let's talk about risk. So what are some of the risks that we're actually seeing related to cutting corners?
Yeah, great question. Generally speaking, I would say cutting corners or performing illegal work poses serious risks to public safety, erodes consumer trust, and disrupts the safety system. Our licensing, certification, and permitting requirements exist to ensure that those who are doing the regulated work have the qualifications to do so safely and legally. Unauthorized work creates a potential safety risk to people and property, as proper assessments of the work performed may not have been conducted by qualified individuals, and any technical noncompliances that exist may not have been identified or corrected as a result. So, for example, a gas appliance that is incorrectly installed may pose a fire hazard or a risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. However, these may be left unaddressed and not corrected because those assessments have not happened. Illegal work can also bring unwanted financial or legal implications to contractors, equipment owners, and their customers. It can result in voided insurance coverage or other consequences, leaving customers financially vulnerable in the event of damage or loss. Something that a lot of people don't necessarily connect to the gray market is that piece. It can also cost a business their reputation if word gets out that they are not operating illegally or creating risks to their customers. But I'm pleased to say that it is now easier for the public to verify permits and any enforcement actions taken against licensed contractors using the permit lookup tool and the Find a Licensed Contractor tool on our website.
Thanks, Darla. Wow, that seems like a number of pretty serious risks to someone's business, livelihood, and even impacting their clients and potentially their reputation, which I'm sure is not always top of mind, like you mentioned, for people when you're in the day-to-day. That can kind of get lost sometimes. So a good reminder. And certainly no one wakes up intending to put someone's safety or life at risk. So I think these reminders are helpful in keeping that top of mind. Okay, Ryan, I'm going to head over to you. So we're going to stay on the same topic of risks, and we're going to dive into a couple investigations. So what's one that really stood out to you in terms of the impact of gray market activity on safety outcomes?
Yeah, thanks, Kaylin. And although it's not my role to actively seek out compliance as a cause or contributing factor to incidents, the reality is that at times it does show up in the incidents I investigate, sometimes kind of in parallel to the incident, sometimes in the causal chain. So this is one of those examples. So in this case, workers were modifying light fixtures in a big box store to convert them from fluorescent lights to LED, something a lot of stores are doing right now for sustainability, for cost-saving reasons. And while that work was happening, the contractors caused a fault, which cut power to the store lighting at the time. And obviously, store lighting is important for a business. This was happening overnight, but Still, activities were ongoing, shelf stocking, things like that. And so a worker and a supervisor for that worker were tasked with troubleshooting. They gained access to a high voltage electrical room on site. And during that troubleshooting work, a worker ended up inserting a tool into a 600-volt electrical panel, which caused an arc fault and significant burns to the worker's hands, face, and eyes. This created long-term or possibly permanent partial vision loss. So obviously an extremely impactful incident for a number of people, including the individual, the other workers, and the supervisors. The story of how this happened, though, isn't as simple as it looks at first glance. In this case, it's really important to understand who was involved in this case. So we had a big box store. They had a need and for this relamping work to occur. So they hired a national relamping contractor to do that work. That was a licensed contractor, and they subcontracted that work to a regional electrical contractor and field safety representative. So for those of you not familiar with the electrical industry, a field safety representative, or FSR, is a certification that's issued by Technical Safety BC for the purpose of doing electrical work. And the FSR is really a linchpin of the safety system in British Columbia when it comes to electrical. They have the appropriate qualifications and knowledge, and they're responsible for being named and pulling the permit before starting the work. So they have responsibilities that come along with that, and that includes making sure the work is done safely in accordance with the Act and regulations, and maybe more specifically, that all persons performing the regulated work on site have the qualifications that are appropriate to do that work. And this is a really key responsibility in this incident. In this case, the FSR hired a supervisor and a number of laborers who were temporary foreign workers to go to do this work at the big box store. And during that investigation, during our investigation following the incident, we didn't find any evidence that the laborers held any electrical qualifications. So we know licensed contractors were involved. FSRs were involved. There were contractual obligations in place to follow regulations, but despite this, the result was that unqualified workers were left doing live electrical work with little to no supervision. And obviously that's not a situation that we want to see occur. So how did this come to be? The FSR was located in Alberta, so they were unable to supervise or inspect the work directly. The supervisor had presented to the FSR a fraudulent certification, and such that the FSR believed that they had sent a qualified electrician to do the work. In reality, that supervisor was not actually on the site while the work was being performed. So unqualified temporary foreign workers were left performing regulated electrical work with no supervision. No permit was pulled before starting that work. And the owner did not validate that qualified people were on site at the times to actually perform that work. So ultimately, there were no checks and balances in place in this case, and this exposed what I would say were vulnerable workers to serious harm. And maybe less obviously, it also exposed the contractors and owners to risk and possible liability. So let's talk a little bit about those outcomes, the what comes next. Obviously, first and foremost is the human cost. And this can't be overstated. The injured worker will be experiencing the consequences of these actions for a lifetime. And there's no coming back from that. There's also the impact on the others involved in the incident, the supervisor, the other workers, the people who responded. That this has an impact on all of those individuals. Aside from the human cost, there's also the financial cost and a number of regulatory investigations, the store and business shutdowns, the cost to repair damages associated with it. They could have changes to WCB premiums. The list goes on. And so really this, in summary, the cost of an incident is very expensive in and of itself. And it's as simple as that. Then maybe something that's not thought about as much is there's the reputational cost for the business, the duty holders who didn't fulfill the responsibility, and also the industry and the safety system as a whole. As licensed contractors, you really need the public to have confidence in the work that you're doing, they need to know that if they hire a licensed contractor, they're going to get a safe and compliant outcome. And safeguarding their property is one of the key benefits that you provide as a licensed contractor. And so incidents like this can really jeopardize that confidence. And so we need to keep in mind that all of these consequences, they exist regardless of whether there is a need for any enforcement action that comes out of it.
That's a really good point to kind of highlight, Ryan, between kind of what Darla was speaking about earlier and how that actually plays out in practice. And it's a really unfortunate incident that occurred. And like you mentioned, those missing checks and balances, you can really see the value of them when you look at an incident like this. And ultimately, that's the purpose of the safety system. And in this case, as a result of that lack of check and balance, someone got seriously harmed and potentially for life. So before we move on, let's go to another polling question and hear from our audience. So we just shared one example of how this can sometimes play out, but we'd like to know from you, have you actually observed unsafe work or gray market activity or incidents like this in your own either personal or professional life? And you should have that poll up on the screen. And so we'll just give it a few minutes. Okay. So, wow. So almost 70% of our audience today has had a similar experience like that. And I think it just kind of underscores that potential risk that you're dealing with when you're either hiring or even overseeing or performing related work yourself. So yeah, these incidents do occur, and I think the best controls and ways for us to prevent it is to really look at those options for making sure you're fully within the system and ensuring you have those checks and balances in place. So with that, Ryan, I know we have another case example that we'd like to share with our audience today. Kind of a similar case where some of those communication challenges also played out in a situation where, again, some significant damage to a building and some serious injuries to an individual occurred.
Yeah, thanks, Kaylin. And you're going to notice some similarities between this incident and the last one, but also some unique factors, which is quite frequently the case in our incidents. So in this instance, we had a mobile laundry facility that was hooked up to a propane fuel supply. And it was used for laundry equipment at an orchard facility during the fruit picking season for temporary workers. When this laundry equipment was purchased, so it's housed in a mobile trailer and it contains a number of gas dryers, and it already had a gas piping system installed within it. When it was purchased, it was just kind of left idle for several years until eventually a contractor was hired to hook it up to a propane fuel supply to fuel those dryers. In this particular case, after the contractor finished hooking it up to a propane fuel supply, the maintenance manager tried to start up the dryers to test them out, the maintenance manager for the orchard facility. And they heard an odd sound, a hissing sound that was quickly followed by an explosion. And as you can see, the damage was quite significant. And it also injured the maintenance manager who was in the trailer at the time, lucky enough to get out without any permanent injuries, but a impactful incident and injuries nonetheless. So let's talk a little bit about how that occurred. So there was a variety of circumstances that led up to this incident. So in this case, a licensed contractor was involved again. In this case, they sent an experienced plumbing apprentice, but who did not hold a gas-specific certification to do this connection. So that was to connect these appliances in the existing gas system to a propane fuel supply. There was also no permit pulled before the work started. The apprentice checked the connections that they made when they did the connection, but as you can see in the picture on the left, there's a number of shutoff valves leading to the actual dryers. And those were closed during the pressure test. That's done intentionally to protect the gas valves during the pressure test. And so everything upstream of those valves was checked, but the connections downstream were not. Now, in this case, a separate check should be completed of the connections downstream afterwards, but because the apprentice hadn't touched those connections, it's not something that they independently verified. What ended up occurring and what wasn't caught was that years ago, when these appliances were purchased, they were converted from natural gas to propane, so that they can be used with propane. Typically, these appliances are shipped for gas. And in this case, an internal connection inside the dryers had not been retightened following that conversion. So the gas code is explicit that when a system is connected to a fuel source, the checks are required to ensure that the entire system is safe. The orchard was notified by the apprentice that the job was complete, but after leaving the site, the apprentice realized they forgot to verify that the appliances were converted to work with propane. He notified his boss, who was the named individual on the license, and a certified gas fitter. But unfortunately, before the orchard could be warned by the contractor, the facilities manager attempted the testing, and obviously the explosion occurred, injuring the facilities manager inside at the time. So why did this happen? The orchard did everything that they were supposed to do in this case. They hired a licensed contractor and they had an expectation that the work would be completed safely. The licensed contractor ended up sending somebody with experience in gas fitting, but someone who didn't hold a certification. And the contractor also didn't pull a permit for the work. I think at times permits and certification, to Kaylin's earlier point, can be seen as paperwork, as an administrative requirement. And people don't necessarily connect that with the safety of the work being performed. But look, the paperwork delineates responsibility. It creates accountability. And when your name is attached to the work, there's an extra emphasis on ensuring it's done properly or that it's supervised and verified before the job is handed over and called complete. So in this case, without that required paperwork or check and balance, there was no verification, and the result was an injured worker and a damaged building. Our system relies on checks and balances, and really this incident shows that working in the gray market can erode some of those checks and balances and leave lives, finances, and reputations vulnerable to harm.
Thanks for sharing both of those impactful stories with us, Ryan. I know being in the Okanagan, it really hits home when you hear about these real cases that have happened, in some cases, in your own backyard. So I know that the audience is likely curious about what the consequences might look like in some of these incidents. And in fact, we've actually received a number of questions already in the Q&A about this. And so we'll go to that now. Realizing that we're not able to publicly comment on any active investigations or actions that are under consideration or may still be within the appeal period or under an appeal, I'm wondering, Darla, if you would be able to share a few publicly available examples where enforcement action was taken around gray market activity, just to give a bit of a flavor for what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kaylin. And yes, unable to speak to any enforcement activity with respect to the incidents that Ryan shared today. But I have a couple of cases that really stand out to me that I'd like to share with you today. The first case occurred back in February of 2024 when we issued a compliance order after a contractor was found performing unauthorized gas work, so without a valid license or a permit in place. Despite the order to comply, by June 2024, the contractor still had not complied, which initiated then an enforcement investigation on our part. A deeper look into that contractor's history revealed a concerning pattern that there was 3 previous compliance orders issued between 2017 and 2024 for unauthorized work involving boiler, pressure vessels, as well as gas systems. Eventually, the contractor did take corrective action. They renewed their license, they obtained the necessary permits, and they called for the inspections. But this only happened after 10 months and multiple warnings by the enforcement team. Fortunately, no one was harmed during this period, like in Ryan's examples, but this case clearly illustrates how cutting corners undermines the trust in the industry. As a result of this contractor's ongoing noncompliance and repeated noncompliance with licensing and permitting requirements, we did impose a $30,500 monetary penalty. Our office is currently monitoring the payment of that penalty that was imposed. And if the penalty remains unpaid, we can enforce that through the courts under the Court Enforcement Act, which could lead to the seizure of property and assets to recover the debt. The second incident that comes to mind is with a homeowner. In 2024, we initiated an enforcement investigation after a series of inspections identified ongoing safety concerns at this residence. Safety officers identified significant safety hazards. A shower was built around an electrical panel and a rusted ventilation system running from a furnace to a hot water heater in the basement suite. Despite multiple attempts, the homeowners refused to correct the hazards, prompting a compliance order. When they failed to comply with that order, we did inform them and warned them of potential enforcement actions, which could include a monetary penalty of up to $100,000. The homeowners through this process disclosed that they were intending to sell their home. We informed the real estate agent that was working with the homeowners and worked with the new buyers to ensure that they were aware of the hazards, the compliance history, and the need to hire a licensed contractor for to complete these corrections. I'm pleased to say that the permits have now been obtained, a licensed contractor is now in place, and corrective work is being undertaken right now.
Thanks for sharing some of those examples, Darla. And I know, like you mentioned, enforcement isn't our first choice. And it typically happens after all other attempts have failed to bring that duty holder into compliance and to ensure that the work and the systems are made safe. But it is clearly necessary if folks are unwilling to meet their responsibilities and to prioritize safety of others, and in some cases themselves, that there be consequences. And so making sure that that is made visible, I think, is really important, and to really understand the weight of what that could look like. I also find it interesting and maybe a bit scary, as we've kind of talked through today's session, that by the time things move into enforcement, these individuals or businesses are already often exposed or actively dealing with some of the consequences of the risks that both you and Ryan have highlighted. And then you add that additional layer of enforcement action, whether it be corrective or in some cases disciplinary, which really can then impact the bottom line, might involve the sale or seizure of personal assets. And I don't think that many people understand that piece there. Or importantly, it could impact your business's reputation and ability to operate long term. For me, that really kind of drives home the point that cutting corners, which may feel like a cost saving in the moment or something that's maybe not as important, or just not taking the time to really understand and appreciate your legal responsibilities and how to fulfill them, it's just not really worth the risk. So with this heavy content, I'm sure those in the audience are wondering, and I'm seeing even a few questions coming through the chat here around what they can do to support. So there are a few ways. First, I think the key take-home message today that we really want to get across is to report any suspected or alleged illegal activity to Technical Safety BC. I think Kate Parker mentioned it early in the session, but we do investigate all incidents that get reported to us. And by identifying those gray market activities, you do also contribute to maintaining that integrity of the safety system and protecting public safety, including in your own community. You can see on the screen that we've tried to make it as easy as possible. So you can give us a call. We have different reporting lines. You can call our contact center. You can call the actual incident reporting line here on the screen. You can also complete an online form in just a few clicks. And you'll see here on the right part of the screen just some details on what to include in your report. So this really helps our enforcement team and others team to really be able to investigate and follow up and action some of these tips and whistleblower reports that we get in. So making sure where possible to include the full business name, or if you have it, the legal name of the individual, any website or contact details, a bit of a description of what you've observed or have evidence of, photos, and in some cases, it may relate to specific locations or addresses, and that can be extremely helpful, as mentioned, for follow-up. The second thing you can do is to make sure that you're well informed. And if you are looking to either operate or to perform regulated work, making sure that you are researching and doing your due diligence to use a licensed and qualified business or individual. We currently have a number of different public registry lookup tools on our website. I think, Darla, you mentioned our permit lookup tool. We have one also for certified individuals. And then we have our licensed contractor lookup tool as well, which you can see on the screen. Making sure that you're hiring someone who is active, so has an active license with us, and the licenses that are required for the type of work that you're doing is one way that you can really contribute. I'll also note that this tool also allows you to see any enforcement actions that may be taken against that individual or business, or any restrictions that or limitations that may have been placed on their license and ability to perform a particular scope of work. So it provides a lot of useful information that allow you to make those safety-minded decisions. So Darla, I know we got one other way that we hope our audience can contribute to the safety system today, so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think the last way would be really for those of you who are overseeing and performing regulated work. Keeping in good standing with Technical Safety BC helps strengthen the safety system. And a key aspect of that is staying current in your knowledge and understanding of the acts and the associated regulations, codes, and the directives and safety orders that are issued by Technical Safety BC as well. Some key things just to pull out of that is having a valid license in each technology that you perform work in. Meeting any terms and conditions that are attached to your license, certification, or your permits, selecting the correct permit type, including permit value and the scope of the work that you're performing, meeting all notification and declaration requirements as outlined in the Act and the regulations. And if your permit expires, it depends on the technology that you're working in. Just please make sure that you are extending your permits before they expire in order to stay in good standing. For more information about all of that, you can find a list of your key legal obligations and responsibilities on our website.
Excellent. And I know also on the screen there, we have a little note. We do have a recent information bulletin as well that provides for licensed contractors or owners a bit more information on how to prepare for an audit of your license. And so encourage everyone to take a look. There's some really helpful information provided there. So with that, that concludes the formal part of our panel presentation. We have about 10 minutes and I see a lot of activity in the Q&A chat. So if you haven't already had a chance to enter your question, please feel free to do that now. And I think we'll get started. So I am going to just take a look. We have a few technical questions in here, so I'll also say I'll throw them out to the group. And if we don't have all of the details, we will be following up after today's session. So feel free to take a look at that if we didn't fully answer all of your curiosities. So we have a question, TSBC do they have any agreement with the engineers and geoscientists of BC to only accept EGBC engineers for design submission or any other jurisdiction that engineers can sign and stamp documents for use in BC? Can you please clarify? Ryan, can I hand that one over to you?
Yeah, Kaylin, you can. Thanks. I spent some time working in our engineering department, so I can respond to that somewhat. So a couple of factors around that. So I guess I want to be clear that we enforce our own act and regulations, and EGBC is responsible for enforcing their act, their professional governance act and regulations. And so obviously, if EGBC sets out requirements for where a BCPN is required, we'll adhere to that. But there's cases as well where our act and regulations aren't that specific, and so we work within our requirements and any requirements that EGBC sets out. We also engage with EGBC regularly so that we make sure that we're on the same page and keep that dialogue open.
Excellent. Thanks, Ryan. We have another question from Doug. Maybe I'll start out, but I'm curious, maybe we can all weigh in on this one. Would gray market activity include the lack of knowledge of railway regulations and rules? Excellent question. I think from my perspective, it's really interesting when you kind of think about gray market activity versus non-compliance. And so for me, what we're talking about today with gray market activity is that key participation in the system with your license, certification, or permit. In the case of railways, that would mean making sure the railway has an appropriate and active minister's certificate and operating permit. But that doesn't preclude folks from not meeting the other technical requirements under the Act and regulations. So, for example, on the safety standard side, one of the requirements for a license holder is that they maintain an active understanding and knowledge of the acts and regulations where they may be performing work. And so while we don't maybe categorize it in gray market activity, it is a critical and important part of our overall safety system. So maybe I'll let the others kind of weigh in on that as well, if you have anything you want to top up on.
Not much to top up on there, Kaylin. I think you answered it wonderfully. I think the one piece that I might say is that the gray market activity isn't always about intent. So yes, sometimes that ignorance or that lack of understanding or lack of knowledge does play a part in people performing work, illegal work within the gray market. And other times it is more of a cutting corner approach or a deliberate decision to participate in gray market.
That's a great top up. Thanks, Darla. Okay, I'm gonna go to our next question. A few days ago, I visited an auto shop and noticed several machine-mounted air receivers were in poor condition. I'm curious, does TSBC regulate air compressors operating above 200 PSI, particularly in these types of settings? And I'm gonna hand it over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Kaylin. Yeah, a couple of things about this one. So we need a lot of the details about the specific case to fully understand our regulation and our jurisdiction in each case. But I will say, generally speaking, pressure vessels are part of our regulation. And so the first thing I want to say is if you notice a hazard or incident, as we mentioned in our presentation, please report that to us so that we can follow up and we can get all those details we need about jurisdiction and respond to that to make sure that there's no safety concern. The second piece to that is we actually have a recent incident investigation involving a very similar case to this and involving some gray market activities. So I thought I'd just use this as an opportunity to chat about that briefly. It's posted on our website, so you can go to the incident investigations page of our website. And this is a case where an air receiver that was purchased used, not meant for the application it was used for, by an auto shop or a sandblasting shop in this case. And it actually, the first time it was pressured up, it basically exploded and acted similar to a rocket ship and went through the roof, resulting in a hole in the roof and came very close to injuring a lot of people. So a significant incident, and so definitely something we want to follow up on. So if you have concerns around the safety of this, please report it to us.
Great answer and great connection to kind of a recent learning. So thanks for that. And thank you again for the question. Just looking at, I think we have a question from Conrad. The only permit necessary for residential heat pump installation is for electrical. If permits aren't required, what about qualifications? I'm an HVAC/R contractor and see homeowner installs often, usually with all the refrigerant already leaked out into the atmosphere. The lack of oversight is disheartening. I think I have a response, but maybe Ryan, I'll go to you first.
I can offer a little bit of perspective on that. So a couple of things. I think depending on the situation, if gas appliance is being removed, something that I think often people are unaware of is that there's actually a permit required to remove that appliance as well. And there's an important reason for that. We've seen incidents involving gas lines being left open and you know, creating the potential for a gas leak and an explosion. So there could be other permits necessary in certain cases. Obviously, if it's just a straight installation of a heat pump, that's not the case. I don't think that specifically addresses you know, the issue with refrigerant leakage and that being a problem. And obviously, I think the second piece that's important is you need the qualifications and the knowledge to be doing the work that you're doing. So if you're an electrical contractor installing heat pumps and don't have the qualifications or knowledge necessary to make the proper connections on refrigeration systems, that is something that you need. So we definitely are looking into that as part of our follow-up in heat pump installations and in gray market activity.
Great response, Ryan. And I think maybe I'll just top up by saying, yeah, this is a focus area. We know that the province has recently committed about $100 million over the next 2 years. So we do expect there to be a pretty significant continuous volume of heat pump installations in the province. Like you kind of indicated, in some cases that actually involves the removal, sale, or decommissioning of other forms of regulated systems and equipment. And so we are working hard to provide that guidance to industry around not just what permitting requirements exist, but also what qualifications are required, particularly if you are removing another system like refrigeration, BPVR, or gas appliances. Like Ryan mentioned, we are seeing some significant hazards associated with that when it's done by unqualified individuals. So encourage everyone to kind of take a look on our website. We do have some communication material around what permits are actually required when. I think there's even a kind of interactive tool that you can use to identify what's needed. And I know we're also looking at some forthcoming guidance on those other pieces that also need to be in place around the decommissioning. All right, just looking at the time, I think we have time for one more question. So maybe I will ask a question from Taylor. It's completely infuriating as a professional that we're losing bids and market share to these fly-by-night contractors. It's a bit of a statement and also maybe a bit of a question. What is Technical Safety BC doing about that? And maybe I can hand that over to you, Darla.
There we go. Sorry, I was having problems with my mute button. Fantastic question, and I can definitely appreciate the frustration being expressed with that question. We're doing a lot to identify people who are operating within the gray market, the underground economy, those who are performing the illegal work. We're doing that in many different ways. And I know I touched base on that a bit during earlier on in the session, but maybe just to highlight some of those pieces again around I believe it was in 2022, our advertising requirements came out. And so one thing that the enforcement team is actively doing is searching for advertisements where there is not a Technical Safety BC license number posted on those advertisements, which is now a requirement. And through that, we're identifying where there isn't that license number. We're contacting the individuals who are advertising that regulated work to find out, are they licensed? Are they not licensed? And if they are not licensed, then we're informing individuals of the requirements and at times initiating an investigation into their operations, the work that they're performing within the province to determine whether there's non-compliances or violations to the act and the regulation, and where there are, then we are taking those proportionate enforcement actions. So that's one way that we're identifying it. We're also receiving meter installation reports from utility companies. So for example, we have a partnership agreement with Fortis BC who lets us know where they're installing meters across the province, and through that we're able to do some investigative work as well to determine whether permits were pulled appropriately by licensed individuals to do any regulated gas work that connects to that meter and through that meter. And so those are things that we are doing to actively identify it. One thing that we are also doing just in our day-to-day work is that the enforcement team does conduct regulatory audits of license holders. In these audits, we are doing a review of the duty holder or the license holder's compliance with all legislative requirements as it relates to their license, any certificates of qualification that they have, as well as with their permitting practices. And that's another way that we are identifying gray market activities and taking the actions where necessary. And as we highlighted as well, that enforcement actions, so the actual actions, the punitive response is not our first go-to. It's not what we want to do initially. We will go there and we will hold people accountable when there's a high risk to public safety, to property, and where duty holders are unwilling or unable to comply with the regulatory requirements.
Great. Thank you so much, Darla and Ryan, for your participation on today's panel. We're actually reaching the end of our session today. I know there are a number of juicy questions still in the Q&A that we didn't have a chance to get to. I even see a few just kind of looking at how they can find more information about either enforcement actions or just transparency related to some of this information. So we'll make sure that all of these questions that we didn't get to and the ones that we did, we will be responding and posting those responses on our website after today's session. So thanks everyone again for your engagement today. For those of you who stuck it through both hours with us, we really appreciate your time and attention and participation in the safety system. Just as a kind of final reminder and take-home message, if you do see or suspect any unlicensed or unsafe work happening in your workplace or in your community, please report it to us. That really helps us again to unearth that gray and underground market activity within the system. And with that, that brings us to the end of our event today. Again, thanks for spending your morning with us, and we hope that today's sessions have been valuable and that you stay in touch. So there's a few options on the screen. You can email us, you can go onto our website, and you can also sign up for some of our newsletters and bulletins. And as mentioned a few times today, once this session ends, we will be sending recordings. So if you missed anything or you'd like to share it, please look out for that. Please also look out for a survey link. We will be providing that as well. That's your opportunity to give us some feedback on how today went, what you'd like to see in the future, which really helps us to make these events valuable and meaningful to you. So thanks everyone again, and have a wonderful day.